everybody. Welcome back to the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle, and my co-host Greg is in full effect. Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I'm blessed. How are you?
I'm the same way. I cannot complain. And today, Greg, we're going to talk about something a little bit different, a little bit more nuanced. And originally, I didn't know how to really frame this episode. I was going to do analytics with football and baseball and how they're impacted negatively or positively. But then I said, well, let's just do baseball because it's too much to talk about. But then after last week's episode, it seems like baseball is kind of cut and dry. So let's kind of go back to the whole aspect of what analytics are for those of you who don't know or may not know what analytics are in terms of sports, and how it affects baseball and how we can contrast that with what's going on with football and what's good about it and what's not so good about it. So I'll start off here real quickly, and you can follow with my interpretation of what analytics are. Tell me, Greg, if I am right on this. Analytics is simply the aspect of taking statistics and probabilities and applying them at a general level that if done a certain enough times, you're more likely to have this outcome versus this outcome. And therefore, you can pretty much say you're going to win X number more games if you do it this way versus that way, instead of leaving it on the field and letting the coach determine based on another level of factors, like my players are tired, you know what I mean? Or maybe they went out to party last night and they, were kind of, not really, maybe they're hungover today. Those sort of things that don't show up on a computer graphic spreadsheet. Is that a good example of what analytics is from a person like me who's coming at it from a layman's standpoint?
I think so. To me, analytics is, to your point, the analyzing of data and establishing trends, observing trends, and the probability of certain things happening during the course of a game, whether it be, okay, if you go for it on 4th and 3 in this situation, you have this probability of making it as opposed to kicking a field goal, or if you, as far as on-base percentage in baseball, how that impacts how the game is played. And, maybe if a certain pitcher pitches this many pitches, then this is what his ERA is, or certain things like that. I could be oversimplifying it. I know there's a lot more to it than that, and a lot more scenarios that get looked at. But basically, to me, analytics is where you take a lot of data from a lot of different statistical categories and analyze them to help determine what you need to do in certain situations. I was talking to you a little earlier about watching the movie Moneyball. I had never seen the movie, but I had heard about it. And I'm like, well, to prep for this, let me watch Moneyball so I can get a feel for how it's used in baseball. So for those of you that don't know, and if you haven't seen it, I don't want this to be a spoiler or anything for you, but the movie looks at Billy Beane. He was a GM for the Oakland A's, and off the heels of their loss, I think in 2001 to the Yankees in the playoffs, they lost like their 3 top players in the offseason. I think maybe one to the Yankees and one to the Red Sox, basically to teams that had a lot more money to spend than the A's did. So at that time, A's ownership, they weren't willing to spend a lot more money. They're like, we don't have the money to compete with these top teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox. We have to make do with what we have. So Billy Beane looked for a way to be able to, one, replace the players that he lost, but also do it within the confines of their payroll. So he discovered a young man that worked for the Indians at the time that majored in economics, went to Yale, and he, I think, was more or less a student of, and forgive me for not remembering the guy's name, I think his name might be Billy James or something. So he wrote a book and talked about, well, I think the term then was sabermetrics, basically more or less using analytics in baseball, and how, using computers and formulas and that sort of thing to determine the strategy and the procuring of personnel and that sort of thing. And, this was very, very unconventional at that time. And Billy Beane kind of flipped old school, baseball talent evaluation on its head. And the idea was, with what you're spending on players, you're not buying players, you're buying wins. And you have to determine, it's all about scoring runs. And, I don't care if this guy, if you think this guy's too old or can't run or can't throw or anything else like that, can he get on base? And that's what a lot of it boiled down to. And at first it did not work well, but when he stuck to his guns as far as making the decision according to the data and sabermetrics, then things started to come together and they started winning. Now, he didn't win a World Series with the A's doing that, but he got the most out of what he had as far as being able to spend money and picking players and that sort of thing. Pretty interesting movie. I learned quite a bit. But I think in general, baseball is a stat-driven sport anyway. So I think analytics and sabermetrics probably fits in a little bit better with that game than maybe the NFL. And I'll give you an example. So I was watching a game, I think it was late, and this, I know this is NFL, this is actually college, but I've seen it in the NFL also, where it was Oregon and Washington. Both teams are ranked high in the polls. Both teams are vying for a place in the college football playoffs. And at that point, Washington was winning the game late. They were up by 4, I believe. It was, let's see. They were leading late. They were up by 4 with 2 minutes and 16 seconds left in the fourth quarter. They had the ball on Washington's 47-yard line. It's 4th and 3. They go for it, and they fail to convert. And the idea was, well, analytics says you should go for it. Also, Washington had no timeouts remaining. So they have no timeouts. They have to score a touchdown to win. You have the ball on their 47-yard line, and instead of kicking the ball, pinning them deep in their own territory, and forcing them to go 85, 90 yards down the field to score, you give them the ball in excellent field position. That turns the tide of the game as far as more momentum is concerned. I'm sure they were, as a team and as a defense, that gave them a fantastic boost. And of course, Washington marched right down, scored a touchdown. Oregon was unable to score when they got the ball back, and Washington wins the game. And I'm thinking, what a boneheaded call. I was stunned that the coach did that. They failed all day. When they went for it on 4th and short, they didn't convert a single time all game long. And I think when you rely so heavily on analytics, I think it takes away from your ability or having the onus to adjust during games. It's critical to be able to make adjustments during games. And to your point, you have to know your team. You have to know the situation. If your team is dead tired and you decide, well, I'm going to, throw, because analytics says on this down and distance you throw, or on this down and distance on fourth down you go for it, and you give the ball right back to the other team instead of punting the ball, which makes more sense. But even with my previous point of, instead of looking to sustain a drive to give your defense a rest, it's like, well, no, I'm gonna chuck it downfield, or I'm gonna pass because my card says that's what I'm supposed to do. And like, this makes no common sense. Also, if you have a young team and it is imperative to keep their confidence up, keep their spirits up, if you go for it in those type situations and you don't make it, it's kind of like letting all the air out of your team's balloon. And now they've got to go back out there and try to stop the other team who now has all the momentum from scoring. And you're also putting a lot of pressure on these guys. And in situations like the ones in the Detroit-San Francisco game, I don't know if you're aware, but Detroit's head coach, Dan Campbell, he goes for it on fourth down so much, they call him Dan Gamble. He goes for it a lot on fourth down. And, it's okay in certain situations to go for it when teams typically don't. But in critical situations so for instance, Detroit was dominating the game early. They were up 24-7 at the half. Now, the Detroit Lions history. They have a history of losing a lot. Yeah. Okay. So now they've turned things around. They're in the NFC Championship game. They've never been to a Super Bowl. The only team that has been in the NFL for the entire Super Bowl era not to make it to a Super Bowl. I think that's the correct stat. Although Cleveland's got to be in there too, because the Browns have never made it. So I don't know that that's right, but I know those two teams have been around, during the entire Super Bowl era, and neither one of them have made it to a Super Bowl.
What's the Browns? Was the Browns the AFC at one point?
Yeah, the Browns are still in the AFC. Yeah.
No. I mean, I'm sorry, AFL.
AFL. Yeah, you're right. And with that being the case, let me think about this. AFL, NFL.
I was with the Kansas City was on that side. So was Raiders, those guys, and they merged at some point. So I was wondering if that's the case, then their Lions have always been in the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. So regardless, they're basically, one of the handful of teams that have never made it, but they've been around as long as the Super Bowl has, and they've never made it. So you've got that situation. You've got a fairly young team with young players. You're up, and it's like, okay, you've got to make the right calls, and you've got to know the situation. So in the third quarter, about halfway through the third quarter, they're up 24-10, and they decided to go for it on 4th and 2 on the 49ers 28-yard line. They failed. The Niners get the ball back and score a touchdown. Now, how deflating is that? Why not kick the field goal? If you kick the field goal, you would be up 27-10 and you'd be up 3 scores. Why not do that? Why not help your team out and put them in a position to be, hopefully successful in the end? But when you do that, you put so much undue pressure on your quarterback, on your receivers. I've got to make this play. I've got to make this play. If I don't, we give them momentum. Well, they didn't, and that's what happened. They got the momentum. In the fourth quarter, the Lions were down 27-24. They had an opportunity to kick a field goal to tie the game. Instead, they go for it on 4th and 3. They failed. The Niners get the ball back and score a touchdown. And I was surprised that the announcers defended the play calling. And I think Greg Olson, I think he was the color analyst, he made a statement similar to this. He said, you can't judge a play call by the results. That doesn't mean it was a bad call. I'm thinking, what are you talking about?
Of course you can.
What are you talking about? What else can you judge the play call on except by its results, especially during that time in the game where the play call is so critical? And you can imagine how deflated the team was when they didn't make it. And you've also got to imagine the field goal kicker. He's probably like, what in the world? Give me a chance to help us win the game. Nope, we're going to go for it. And to me, in my opinion, relying too heavily on analytics, I think gives these coaches, I think, a false sense of security that they can just forego all of the different indicators that you used to go by when making these decisions. I think anybody else would say, yeah, you'd kick the field goal. You'd kick the field goal in that situation. Or in the case of Washington, Oregon, you punt the football. And my wife will tell you, she's heard me a bunch of times up the hall yelling at the TV, kick the field goal, punt the football.
Yeah.
In reaction to these types of decisions. So you have to, if you're going to use analytics in football, and I think there's a place for it in football, but you have to be careful. I know teams go for it more on 4th and short. I get it. Some situations it's warranted. Some situations it's not. But be mindful that you have to pay attention to where your team is at that particular point in time in the game, in the season. What are the consequences if you don't make it? And instead of compounding the problem by just continuing to go for it, be humble enough to say, yeah, I got to adjust. We need to take the points here. And I think that's the road maybe some of these coaches are going down. And, when Detroit lost to Dallas, I know that was a rotten call by the referees at the end of the game when they took the touchdown off the board because they claimed the lineman did not report when he clearly did. But there were a bunch of times during that game where Detroit again went for it on 4th and short and did not make it. At some point, that decision-making is going to catch up to you. It's going to catch up to your team. And it's going to have a great impact for good or for bad. So, again, I'm not saying analytics doesn't have a place in football, but I think you have to use those types of decision-making wisely and judiciously and, be mindful of the other factors in the game. But I know that was kind of a long rant, kind of all over the place, but
no, it's great.
But I think, especially in the case of football, you have to be really careful. To me, it just fits so much better with baseball because of the nature of the game and it being statistic driven rather than football. I could be wrong. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, that's good. I'm gonna talk about baseball here in a second, but I want to just run through a few things here because I know some of you hardcore guys are going to be honest about this. The Cleveland Browns were founded in 1944 with taxi cab magnate Arthur B. and Mickey. It was the All American Football Conference, was what I was thinking. I thought they were part of the AFL. They were not. They were always part of the NFL. But that was with Paul Brown started that up. Let's go in terms of the Peter Brand was the guy whose name you're thinking about from Moneyball, I believe. Peter Brand. He was played by Jonah Hill's character.
Yeah.
Partially based on Paul DePasta, I think that's what it says here.
Yeah, they changed his name for the movie, I believe.
Okay.
Probably rightfully so, but
yeah. So that's that. And I was going to say something really quickly here. There's a show on. This is really interesting. It's a fun watch. It's on YouTube. It's 2 seasons of it. It's about the coach Kevin Kelly. He used to coach for the Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. The coach never punts, and he always goes for 2. And it's an interesting series. High school, highest level. I think it's 5A. Yeah, 5A state championship. He's won literally like 10 championships, using this style, but just blowing teams out of the water because they're always going for 2. They're always onside kicking, and they never punt. So, and by him just doing the numbers, he's able to just dominate because eventually he catches up. One time he got in trouble where it was like 4th and like 3 on his own 10-yard line. And of course he didn't punt. And then they turned the ball over on the 10-yard line and they got scored on. And I think they ended up losing the game. But most of the time in that high school level, he was able to get away with it. But he also had good players too. So that was also part of it. And so let's talk about Cleveland, Marshawn. Oh, and Marshawn Lynch, I got to think about that. Just run the ball, right? I mean, let me ask you a question before we get into the baseball. I got to talk about Marshawn Lynch. This is Super Bowl. I forget which one it was. You know what I'm talking about. They were going for a repeat. This is Seattle. They were going for a repeat. This is against Tom Brady. They had Tom Brady dead to rights, about to score the winning touchdown. It was like a first and goal. I think Marshawn ran for 8 yards, 7 yards, right? They were on the 3-yard line, second or something, and they passed the ball, intercepted across the middle, and we know the rest is history. Was that analytics, or was that just stupidity?
I would like to maybe blame that on analytics, but I just think it was the coach being too cute. I just think it was a horrifically bad call because they could not stop Marshawn Lynch. I mean, he was just a battering ram. I mean, just marching down the field, handing him the football. And Tom Brady's reaction to that interception was priceless. He was shocked.
It was.
He was shocked. What? Of course, I was shocked too, sitting there watching it.
Yeah.
But I think that's a situation where they just got too cute for their own good and basically handed New England the victory. I don't know that you could blame that on analytics. I just think that was just a very bad call. I know it's a very old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. New England could not stop them running the football. Just keep giving it to them. If they stop them once, give it to them again. I mean, if you're going to do, and running a slant pattern there, I mean, it's just too crowded. I don't know what in the world they were thinking.
Do a fade route in the back of the end zone.
I mean, if you
not throw it, yeah.
Yes. But to throw it in a crowd off of a slant pattern, that's one of the worst calls I've ever seen.
Or a sprint option, giving a chance, a speed option, giving a chance to either run out of bounds, throw it to an open receiver, throw it out of bounds, give them some options. But that was a straight drop back across the middle, and they just jumped that route.
It was an early Christmas gift for sure. I think a lot of people were stunned that they did that. And I think it kind of ties together, whether analytics is the motivation for these decisions or whether it's just trying to be too cute. And I'm not saying coaches have not been too cute in the past, but nowadays it just seems like, just go with the simple play. Just go with the play that makes the most sense. When you see teams, and I don't want to dismiss analytics as gimmickry, but I think it lends itself to that, where teams may do things that they may not normally do because analytics says, okay, 4th and 3, at this end of the field, you go for it, or just something, trying too hard to trick the other team when the other team's not stopping you at what you were doing to get to where you are. So, yeah, that was just stunning. I just think it was just an absolutely bad call. I don't think that can be blamed on analytics, but yeah, but again, I think analytics may lend itself to getting a little too cute, more cute than you need to be when it comes to play calling in certain situations.
So let's get back to your Daryl Morey, and this may be a topic for another discussion because we mentioned this at one of the other episodes. You talked about that the Daryl Morey, I think that the deal with the Houston Rockets, we talked about him with LeBron James. I'm going to bring this in just because we talked about it, just at a high level. If we want to finish the rest of the show on this, we can. We can talk about Ricky Henderson another time because that could be another session all in itself. But just for sake of bringing this up, because we did mention it before, I want to kind of revisit it. On the screen here, for those of you guys who are actually on YouTube, you can see this. This is a graphic of NBA's analytics revolution has led to 3-point galore. And I'll just read this real quickly and we'll talk about it.
Sure.
So it says the sustained success of MLB franchises like the Rays and the A's, two resource-starved franchises compared to the rest of the league, has shown the power of data-driven decision-making, which has translated to other major team sports, most notably the 2010 Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, and Moneyball. I never heard of that. Yep. Who, this is in green, I highlighted this, who prioritized layups and three-pointers effectively, devalued the mid-range shot from today's NBA, helped the Houston Rockets become second most winningest franchise during Morey's tenure. And here on the chart here, it shows from 98 all the way out to 2018, it shows from the three-point line going from 13% all the way up to 2018 to 33%, and contrastly, from 30% mid-range in 1988 going down to 19% only 20 years later. Greg, what do you think about that? The mid-range jumper, what happened to that?
Well, yeah, I guess it went the way of the dodo, I guess, and is about as apparent as, finding a unicorn or Bigfoot. I mean, and I keep going back to when I was a kid, but during the 70s and the 80s, especially before the three-point shot, being able to hit a mid-range jump shot was critical. You needed to be able to knock down shots from 15 to 18 feet. But to your point, Daryl Morey, he looked at the numbers and decided that, yes, we need to put a premium on shooting threes and shooting layups. He had James Harden on that team, and he could certainly do both. Harden was almost unstoppable off the dribble, and he could get to the basket basically whenever he wanted, but he chucked up a lot of threes too, but that was Houston's way. I think I saw, an interview with Shane Battier, who was on, I believe, that team at that time. And he even talked about certain places on the floor where it was more favorable to shoot from than others. And they looked at the stats. I think like the shortest distance from three, like in the very corner, I think he was saying that was the best place for him to shoot them from. And there was a method to all that. But to me, when that's working, that's fantastic. But what happens when you're not hitting threes?
Right. There you go.
And I know from watching Houston back in those days, how many championships did they win doing that? As many as I've won. So it works great in the regular season.
Yeah.
But when you get to the playoffs and you're playing better teams in a 5 or 7 game series, you can't always get away with that. And I know one series, and I can't remember who Houston was playing. I think they were up in the series and should have won, but they let it get away. And there was one game, I can't remember the percentage they were shooting from three, but they were ice cold. They had missed, I don't know how many threes in a row. I think it was in double digits, to the point where I'm watching this and I'm like, why are they still shooting threes? Harden was unstoppable off the dribble, and they went away from that and they just kept chucking threes. Mike D'Antoni was the coach, if I'm not mistaken. And I think a sideline reporter asked him, it's like, well, your threes aren't falling. Are you going to adjust and do something else? And he goes, no, we're going to keep doing what got us here. And I'm thinking, seriously? And of course, the opponents got back into the game and they wound up winning that game. And I think a lot of it has to do with D'Antoni's unwillingness to adjust. And I also think it was, I think once they stop hitting so many threes, now you're panicking. Now we can't hit one. We've got to hit one. We've got to hit one. And if you putting that much pressure on yourself, you're not going to hit any of them. And to me, as a coach, he should have said, look, I know that's what got us here, but we're in the playoffs now. This is not working. James Harden, we're going to do like a 1-4. We're just going to get out of your way, and whoever's guarding you, you take them to the basket every single time. We're going to do ISO every single time until they stop it. That's what I would have done. We're not hitting threes. It's not working. Let's do what is working, and that's taking the ball to the basket. But, again, Daryl Morey was very huge on analytics, and they were very serious about it in Houston. And for the most part, it worked. But again, when it got down to winning time in the playoffs, it did not work nearly as well. And that's what I was saying about analytics a little while ago. I think it lends to an unwillingness to adjust. It's like, yes. Well, the numbers say this is what we should do, so we should do it. But I'm sorry, it's not working. So surely you need to do something else. So yeah, there's a place for analytics, but I don't think it should be the end all to beat all in sports like, basketball and football. Again, baseball, I think it works better just because of the nature of the game and it's stats driven. But the NBA and the NFL, I don't think it works as well. And again, look at how many championships Houston won. Daryl Morey's with the Sixers now. How many championships have they won in Philly since he's been there? So you have to look at the end results to see whether this stuff is truly working or not. I think it'll get you to a certain point, but then beyond that, as far as winning championships, you have to be willing to adjust if that does not work.
I'll say this, and I'll let you finish this out, but I think for those two sports, football and basketball, I think I can think of the two reasons why analytics doesn't work that well for those two, and I'll even say why it does work for baseball. Why it does work for baseball is because of the nature of the sport. I think the basketball rim is 10 inches across, so that's a small rim when you have to take a shot at a pressure situation. That rim that gets really, really small. That ball gets really, really big for some reason. That shoulder, that wrist, that those legs are weakening in those moments. And so no matter how many analytics you have, it doesn't change the fact that rim is pretty small. And if you jack in threes, well, it doesn't take much to throw you off a little bit. The pressure of the shot, the length of the game. Usually, if it's at the end of the game, you're already tired anyway. That's the problem. And in football, I think it's the physicality. How many times do you see in championship games? Look at the Giants and the Patriots, or look at any playoff game. before the past 5 years. The playoffs, they always hit harder. The hits were always harder. Look at the NHL. You have people jumping in front of pucks in the playoffs. They don't do it during the regular season. They're flying on the ground, putting their face and their body in the middle of pucks to stop the pucks because it's the playoffs. And those are the kind of things the analytics can't measure because those are human condition situations that you just can't deal with. Now, if you have a bunch of Jordans and Kobe's and you have a bunch of Larry Birds and Magic Johnson on your team, well, then sure, it's going to work because you have the caliber of person that can persevere in those kind of moments. But if you don't have the personnel to persevere in those kind of moments, the analytics won't do you any good because when it comes down to it, you're going to break it because the moment is too big for you. And in baseball, I think it just comes down to, can you make contact to the ball? And people who are batters are typically pretty talented at making contact. And sometimes you just have to get, the ball in play for the analytics to kick off. So that's my thoughts on it, just the nature of the sports and why analytics breaks down in those pressure moments in the playoffs and football because of physicality and people hitting harder, and in basketball because the rim gets smaller and tighter, which is why, I'll say this, for the longest time, you could not win a championship without a big man. You could not. You needed Patrick Ewing. Well, that's a bad example. You needed Elijah one, right? And outside of the Bulls era, because you had the triangle offense, that's an anomaly. But typically, you needed a Moses Malone. You needed a Wilt. Well, that's not a good example either, really. But he did win one.
Yeah.
Kareem, there you go. You had to have those guys because that was the nature of the game. The reason why is because the closer you are to the basket, the higher your percentage is. And when it comes down to those last few moments, you have to get someone to make a shot. You have to get a shot every single time down the floor in those last 2 or 3 minutes. But Jordan could do it because he was a 6'6" 2 guard. He could do it because he was Jordan. But how many Jordans are there out there that are that clutch all the time? There aren't. So you have to be lucky to have a Jordan, or you have to have a big man who's 1 foot from the basket who can dunk it on you.
I agree. And I had this one stat because I was thinking about being able to win championships, especially in baseball, with a low payroll. So only one team, the 2003 Marlins, won a World Series after ranking in the bottom 10 in opening day payroll. So it's very difficult to do, in any sport, I think, but especially baseball. If you don't spend the kind of money the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Mets or the Braves or my team, the Phillies, we spent a lot of money and it didn't result in a World Series win, unfortunately. But if you don't spend that type of money, it's very hard to win championships in baseball. So I think in the case we were talking about with the Oakland A's and Billy Beane, analytics certainly got Oakland probably further than they would have considering the talent they had. I don't know how much the Marlins used analytics back during that championship run. I'm guessing they probably used it to a certain extent because, again, baseball is a stats-driven sport. But you can't just use analytics. You've got to have talent. And, no matter how successful you are with analytics, if you don't have talent or if you don't have good coaching or some of those other elements, it's still going to be difficult to win. I think analytics is a tool, but I don't think it should replace the other things that you need to have and use to be successful at a championship level.
So I think we'll just leave it there, and I think we'll probably call this episode for a wrap. If you guys want to reach out to us via email, you can at info@theconservativetake.com. We will have a show at some point in time. Greg, what do you think about answering questions? Would you like to do something like that?
Sure, I'm fine with that. I think it'll be interesting, again, to get the perspective of the listeners, because I think from our perspective, I know with me sometimes it might sound like, the grumpy old man, get off my lawn type mentality, but I'm really not. I do come at a lot of things from an old school perspective, but I also try to consider and understand, the newer ways of doing things. I'm not totally dismissive to those things. I mean, some things are even better than they used to be. And, but it'll be interesting to hear people's questions of us, because again, getting a different perspective from different people, that helps us grow. That helps to understand each other, because people have a different take on things, maybe different than we do. And even with our conversations between us, we often mention things that, wow, I didn't think of that before. That's a pretty good take on that. So I think that would be a good opportunity for us to get a feel for, what our listeners think and their perspectives. And, I'm sure it'll be enlightening. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Well, I don't expect a discussion on this, but I will say this real quickly. As a big tennis fan, you just said something about things are a little bit better now in some areas. I would say that men's tennis and probably women's tennis are probably the best they've ever been in my lifetime. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the technology, has to do with the slowing of the courts down, particularly on grass, has to do with the top spin on the rackets now, where the ball basically has so much top spin, it's going to stay in play, which means you have longer rallies. And so I think in tennis, it's really paid off. And I think some of the sports technology in terms of the automatic line play has made it really exciting. And some of the European leagues coming up with women's being more accessible to courts and everything means the women's game now is as competitive as it's ever been I've ever seen. So tennis is a good example of that. I can't think of any more right now, but I'm sure we can talk about that more. So when you guys email us, let us know. We're going to open up to any sport that we can get our hands on. And if we don't know about the sport, we'll learn about it, and we'll definitely address those as well. Because this is not limited to just football, basketball, baseball. We want to talk about all sports if we can. Boxing, MMA. And I would, Greg, personally, if you want to get into some WWF or some old school wrestling, I would definitely do that. That may ruin our credibility as a podcast, but
hey, I'm an old school wrestling fan, man. I could talk about old school wrestling all day. So yeah, I'm game for that. And other sports too. I love NASCAR. So, I mean, if there's something you want to talk about regarding NASCAR, the Daytona 500 is coming up in a few weeks. So that'll certainly be exciting. So yeah, we're willing to discuss, many other sports, besides basketball, football, baseball, etc. I'm open to discussing, any sport. I'm always willing to learn. So if I don't know a lot about a particular sport, hey, I'll do my homework and be ready to discuss. So yeah, that's exciting. So looking forward to that.
Yep. So this is our 4th episode. So thank you all for sticking around and listening to us for this long. We'll be back with you next week. We don't know what the topic is yet. Filming these 4 at a time, and we're going to keep plugging away. But by the time you probably see this, we'll have 12 in the can, and we'll let you know what those are once they come to finish in terms of the editing and all that stuff. So Greg, I'll let you close out. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.
All right. Thank you kindly. It's been a blast. We'll see you soon.